Okay, so I'm going to get ready to cast on my ribbing for this sock, and I like to use the E-wrap cast on for the double bed E-wrap cast on. After experimenting with the different methods for casting on, starting with where you do the zigzag row between your ribber and your main bed. I've tried it using the broken toe method. I've tried it using waste yarn to cast on and ravel cord and all of that, and I've had the best luck so far with getting the cast on I'm looking for by using the double E-wrap. If I can get it to focus here, you can see it gives a very neat cast on edge. It's very stretchy, so there's no binding when you wear the sock. So that's the cast on I'm going to go with. And for my foot, I like a 72 stitch sock. So that means the foot of my sock, I will have 72 stitches in work. So with an industrial rib cast on, there's going to be more needles in play for my ribbing than 72, but that's okay because it gets worked out in later steps. So to start, I try to make sure I set my carriages up for each step. I've made plenty of errors going along while I was learning how to do this, and usually it was forgetting to make a setting change on the carriage. So I have the Singer Memo-Matic 700 with the Studio SRP-60 Ribber. And for my machine, my settings for the ribbing, and using Croy sock yarn, I set the tension on both carriages. Actually, I think it's helpful if you think of this not as tension but as stitch size. So I'm going to set my stitch size to 5 on both carriages. And the reason why I like to think of it as stitch size rather than tension is because as your number increases, it gets looser. It knits a larger stitch. So that way it makes more sense to me. So on my main carriage, I'm going to set my stitch lever to stockinette. Both of the Russell levers are going to be flat to the carriage on the number 2 position. My my patterning levers are both going to be set to the triangle on both sides. And on the Ribber carriage, both levers are set to the 1 position. Both of the Russell levers are set to the 2 position, so it matches the main carriage. I am going to rack my ribber bed to the H6 position for casting on. And then to get the 72 stitch sock, I am going to start at 10, 20, 30, 5, 6, stitch 37, so I start at that stitch, and I bring forward 2 needles, skip 1 until I get to 10, 20, 35, 36, needle 36. So on this end, I only have 1 needle brought forward, and that's how you want it. So on the main bed, I'm going to do the opposite. I start at 36 on the left and bring those needles forward, and I go to needle 37 right. So again, I have a single needle at the right hand edge. Excuse me. So for my E-wrap cast on, I bring these needles all the way forward. So these needles here are my rubber bed needles. I'm going to wrap my yarn around those in a clockwise direction. And you can see by racking to H6, I have 2 ribber needles, 2 knitter, or 2 main bed, 2 ribber, 2 main bed, and I'm just going to go across. I'm going to rack clockwise for all of my rubber needles and counterclockwise for all of my main bed needles to keep the tension of my E-wrap uniform. As I come down to the main bed needles, I'm occasionally going to let go of the yarn and let the tension mast snug up the stitches, not to make them tight, but to have them uniform across the bed, because I am Okay, so this is my E-wrap done. And you can see how it's, you know, fairly uniform. And that's because I let the tension mast set the tension for me as I go along. Okay, so if you haven't already done it, now is the time to look after, excuse me, look after your carriage settings. I am going to knit my first row. So if you're new to knitting, you always want to pull down your yarn as you knit the first row, because while the carriage is sitting here, sometimes your tension mast will loosen up, and if you don't give the yarn a gentle tug as you're pulling your carriage across, like from here until your first needle, you can end up with a big loop at either end that causes issues. So I make sure I pull up my slack as I'm approaching that first needle, and then I go across. Not fast. I want to, at this point, I'm not worried about speed. I'm worried about making sure that all of my needles knit properly. So, and that's the other thing, is I'm going to check all my needles moving across to make sure that they've knitted. So for any that haven't knitted, I just bring the needle up and make that stitch knit off cleanly. So that one is good. This one, this end stitch, I don't know, it always looks a little wonky. Like, it never really looks knitted to me, it always looks twisted, but I think it's okay. Okay, so I'm going to use my double eye transfer tool to move this stitch down to my rubber band. And I'm going to I'm going to rack my rubber bed back to H5. Set my counter to 0, and then knit my 50. Oh, yes, let's not forget this. We need this. I have to add the weight. Sometimes if you bring the main bed needles out just a little, take up the slack on your ribber bed needles, it can make it easier to get the comb in without splitting stitches. So, because then you can it just gives you a little more room to bring your comb up between the beds without splitting stitches. And then I add my 3 large weights. Back to H5. Tighten all those up. And I kind of like to pull down on the cast-on comb just a little bit for this first row, just so it doesn't really interfere with things. But again, my yarn tension has loosened off, so you have to give that a bit of a tug to make sure you don't get any loops. This is a hard row to knit, and that I believe is more due to the cast-on comb than anything. So those knit, and this one here, they need a little bit of help. Stitches formed. Pull this one through. Even everyone out. Okay, so now I'm going to just knit my 55 rows of ribbing. And there we are, 55 rows knitted in, I don't know, less than 5 minutes. Okay, so next step, we're going to be transferring stitches from the ribber to the main bed. So to do that, we're going to remove some of the weight, not all of the weight, but some of the weight, just to make it easier. We're going to use our double-eyed needle tool. And you can move your racking as you need to make the needle position that you're transferring from line up to the needle position you're transferring to. So when you transfer these stitches, you're going to wind up with 2 stitches on your end needle and 2 stitches on every 3rd needle. If you're doing it correctly, that's how it ends up working out. So like I said, feel free to change the position of your ribber bed as needed to make those needles line up. It makes your work easier, and yeah, I kind of enjoy transferring stitches. It's simple, methodical. You just take your time and get the job done. So once you've transferred all of your stitches from your ribber to your main bed, first off, I misspoke earlier. You do want to keep your weights on while you're doing the transfers. So you're going to knit 1 row to bring the carriage from the right side of the bed to the left side of the bed. You're going to set the ribber carriage to not knit, so move these levers to 0, at least on the Singer machines. That's how it's done. So because every 3rd needle you have 2 stitches on every 3rd needle. If you leave the tension at 5, you can feel that row of stitches. It feels tighter than the rest. So for myself, and this is just what I like to do, I like to increase the stitch size to 6 for this 1 row. Once this row is done, I will set it back to 5. So you want to draw up your yarn again to make sure you don't create a loop on that edge, and then knit the row. So once it's done, you want to make sure that all of your needles have correctly knitted and fix any that have not. And then comes the next step, which is the hardest part. We are going to move all of these stitches around so that half are on the main bed, half are on the ribber, and we'll be knitting a tube.